Hello, Year 11. Last lesson we looked at the causes of uneven development. Today we're going to look at the consequences. And the consequences are that it leads to disparities, that means differences in wealth, health, and it also leads to migration. Let's make a start. Pause this slide and I want you to see whether you can connect the regions on the right hand side, some of which are continents, for example, Europe and North America, and Africa, South America, and some are just regions that or countries or areas like Asia Pacific, which will include Asia and parts of Australasia as well. And China is obviously a country, and so is India. See if you can marry those up to the bars on the left on the chart. Now, just look at it closely before you start making any judgments. The blue is showing you percentage of global population in that area, and the yellowy mustard colour is showing you the percentage of total global wealth. When you think that you've grasped it or you've got a few of them, move on and see whether you are right. Okay, so have a look and see what you have got right. Now, I'm hoping that you would have I'm really hoping that you would have at least got North America and Europe as our two wealthiest continents at the top of the chart, showing that they have smaller populations but actually hold a lot of global wealth. And I'm hoping that you would have had Africa at the bottom with a growing population. It's not the biggest, but it has a rapidly growing population and contains very small amount of total global wealth. The ones in the middle would have been a lot harder to do. You might have got one or two right, or just one or two switched around in the wrong places, but well done if you managed to get the top two and Africa. Let's just talk through this then and explain why. So why is it that Africa contains such a small amount of global wealth? Well, again, you might want to make one or two notes on this, and it links really into yesterday's lesson. Africa is like a pre-industrial society. So pre means before. So before the development of industries, and industries are what manufacture goods. So think back to yesterday's lesson when you were learning about why it is that they are poor. A lot of people in Africa will live agrarian lifestyles. That means that they are heavily involved in farming. Farming earns very little, if at all. And a lot of the people that are involved in these agrarian lifestyles will be involved in subsistence agriculture. Subsistence means that they're just growing enough food for themselves, for their families. They have very little left over. If they have a little bit left over, they might sell it on a local market for a few pence. But really, they are not earning money as such. And because of that, they don't pay tax to the government. And obviously that then means that the government is unable to develop the economy further. It struggles to build industries and businesses because of the fact that it hasn't got the money to do so. So there's a heavy primary industrial focus in African countries. Most people are involved in extracting raw materials, which earns very little. And as you know from last lesson, in terms of trade, you get very little money for it because it's an unfinished product. So it leads to the country having a low GNI. So that's why Africa holds a very small percent of global wealth. Let's contrast that with North America and Europe. These are post-industrial societies. It means that they've been through their industrial revolution. They've developed their industries. They have made lots of money, and they've moved beyond that now into consumer lifestyles and employment in tertiary and quaternary services. So just to remind you, tertiary sector is services, and quaternary industries are involved in research and development and very high-tech industries. So consumer lifestyles, as consumers, we spend a lot of money. We buy a lot of stuff, and that obviously makes a lot of money for a country. So we're selling as well. We're selling finished products and services, and that will increase the GNI in those continents. And that has been allowed because of development. So the development in infrastructure, in having good roads, good railway, good transport, water systems, sanitation, Wi-Fi, whatever, you name it, having that good infrastructure has encouraged and allowed businesses to set up offer jobs, and earn lots of money. And that's why continents like North America and Europe hold such a large percent of global wealth. And remember, when it comes to trade, they are trading finished products, which earns a hell of a lot of money. They are buying raw materials for cheap, and they are finishing them, processing them, and earning a lot of money from it. So that explains that. And then we've got areas in the middle, like Asia Pacific and China. These are our industrializing societies. Remember, we use the expression newly emerging economies. And in these areas, we have a rising number employed in secondary industries and the manufacturing of products, manufacturing of goods. So therefore, it's going to start to lead to an increase in their GNI. So those countries are rapidly industrializing, and they're starting to see the percentage of global wealth, they're starting to see that increase, which explains why those mustard-coloured bars are growing in those areas. So that explains that chart, and it explains why developed areas have more money. Okay, and it's all to do with the fact that the development in infrastructure has allowed business to thrive and us to move into tertiary and quaternary industries. Whereas for Africa, people involved in farming, paying no tax to the government, means that the government struggles to develop the infrastructure in the area, which means that it struggles to get its businesses and its industries off the ground, and people stay trapped in poverty and in jobs in primary industries, earning very little. Okay, I wanted to also show you that these disparities don't just happen between different countries and around the world, but they also happen within countries. So take, for instance, the UK. These two photos are showing you some very, very deprived areas in our own city. So there are disparities. You can take, for instance, the wealthy wards of Woollerton and West Bridgford and contrast them with the much poorer wards of St Anne's, Lenton, Radford, Hyson Green, much poorer, much more deprived neighbourhoods. So disparities, yes, they exist between countries, but they also exist within countries. Just to reiterate that point, pause this and study it for a little bit, and then pause to hear my explanation. Okay, so we've got England and Wales on the left-hand side there, showing deprivation. Deprivation is areas where people are really struggling. They might be below the poverty line. They're living in conditions that are not particularly brilliant, probably got fairly poor diets, generally not doing as well at school, and they're struggling. And as you can see from looking at this chart, there are certain areas where we have pockets of deprivation. So like here, up in the northwest of England, getting my compass directions wrong, and the northeast of England just there. And then we've got some areas down here, South Wales, and these areas are considered to be fairly deprived, where people are struggling. Then when we contrast that with this graph here on the right hand side, which is showing you mortality, so really our life expectancy, again, we can see a direct link. So we've got a much lower life expectancy here in the northwest and in the northeast, and again in these areas in South Wales. And yes, there are one or two other areas as well, but again, they seem to be mirrored on both maps. So what this is telling you then is that there are deprived areas where people are on very, very low incomes, struggling to make ends meet, and that has a direct impact on their life expectancy. And, you know, just to bring this home to you and link it into our current situation with the pandemic, we have seen that the death rates amongst the urban poor is actually far higher than the death rates amongst our wealthy people that are working in tertiary and quaternary industries where they can actually work from home, can't they? Using Wi-Fi, etc. And they can be away from people. Then you contrast that to people that are in low-paid jobs like cleaners in hospitals and porters in hospitals and bus drivers and taxi drivers, you know, people driving public transport. people working in Sainsbury's and Tesco's on the checkouts. These are people that earn minimum wage, and they are right in the front line, dealing with people day to day, and therefore more likely to contract the virus and more likely to die from it. Whereas, like I say, our wealthier people working in high-tech businesses using their laptops can do that quite easily from home. So there's a direct link between wages and deprivation, and therefore health as well. Let's move on. Okay, I'd like you to have a go at this task, and I'd like you to submit your answer to your teacher. I have given a bit of guidance on here as well. Now remember, the question says using the source, so you must use the source. So you have to use that and explain how uneven development leads to disparities in global wealth. I would start by talking about Africa, like we did earlier. You might want to quote one or two numbers from the chart to show that you're using the chart, and then explain why it is that Africa is kept so poor. So again, use one or two of the things off the previous slide. Then I should do a direct comparison with North America, and again, explain why North America has been able to get wealthier. You need 2 good developed points for this, and you need to have used the chart in order to get 4 marks. Spend 5 minutes on it, make it neat, make it tidy, make it good, and send it to your teacher. And move on. Okay, so we've looked at disparities in wealth. What about disparities in health between high-income countries and low-income countries? So, out of 100 deaths in HICs, how many, as a percentage, do you think are in the over 70 age group? Have a think, shout out your answer. Here it is. 70. 70% of all deaths in high-income countries are in the over 70 age group. And that makes sense because they're getting old. Okay, next question. How many do you think are in the are age 15 or under? As a percentage, what do you think? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. 1%. A very small amount. Exactly what you'd expect. It's very rare, isn't it, for people that are young to die? And it's shocking when they do because it's so rare. Next question. What do you think are the main causes of death in high-income countries? Now, ignoring the pandemic, what do you think are the main causes of death in high-income countries? Again, 3, 2, 1. Here are the answers. Generally, heart disease and lung disease. They're the only real diseases, and that's one of the reasons why we have a heavy focus on you exercising each day and eating healthily and not becoming obese. That means overweight, because actually those things lead to heart and lung disease. Cancer, dementia and diabetes, they are the main causes of death in high-income countries. And what sort of infectious diseases do people die from, generally? Have a guess? Only lung infections. We don't generally die from other kinds of infections like colds and coughs and flu. So really, mainly lung infections. Now let's do the same for low-income countries and see how it compares. So, out of 100 deaths in low-income countries, how many do you think are in the over 70 age group? Only 20%. Much, much smaller. Okay. How many do you think are in the under the 15 and under? Now, it was 1% for high-income countries. Here are the answers. 40. Look at that difference. 40% of deaths in low-income countries are in your age group and below. Now that's shocking. What do you think are the main causes of death in low-income countries? Well, complications in childbirth. That explains why there are so many, such a high percentage in deaths under 15. And in terms of what sort of infectious diseases do people die from? Many infectious diseases. HIV and AIDS, diarrhea, malaria, tuberculosis. But the horrifying thing about this, folks, is that all of the infectious diseases that they're dying from, and things like HIV, diarrhea, malaria and TB, they can be treated. We don't die from them because we can vaccinate against them or we can treat them, so we don't die from them. And that's what's so shocking about this. This is the disparity. So it's not just the fact that more people die. It's not as simple as that. It's who's dying in terms of age groups and why. It's pretty much unheard of now for children to die in complications in childbirth in high-income countries. It's very rare. It does happen, but it's very rare. Same with losing the mother. It's very rare. But this is actually incredibly common in low-income countries where people might be having home deliveries without a midwife there. And to die from things that can be cured, well, again, if you're living in areas where there are no clinics and there are no vaccinations against these things, then you will die from them. So it's very, very different. And the world's deadliest creature, which currently might well be the coronavirus, but in general terms, it isn't. In general terms, it's malaria. This is an interesting map. I suggest you pause it and study it for a bit. Top left shows just the normal world map. I put that there so that you can see it as a direct comparison. But the map I really want you to look at is this one that's been distorted. With a quote, "My wife died a few months ago, very probably from malaria because she had a lot of fever and was also vomiting. But she never went to a health centre because of the lack of money." Now, isn't that a sad state of affairs? But that's how it is. Now, this map has been distorted to show you where most deaths are due to malaria. And I just want to show you something here. I'm going to circle this area here. This area here, that is showing you North America. Now, it's been squeezed into basically just a line because there just are no deaths from malaria. And the same with South America, very few deaths. So it's barely shown on the map. That's what it should look like on this map up here, look. So it's been squeezed. Same with Oceania down here. Europe, just there, look. It's barely functioning. And then all of this is the continent of Africa. And these countries in particular, in tropical areas in the centre here, look at how big they have been made. And that is showing you disparities in health. Now, people can, obviously, tropical regions, there is a lot of malaria in tropical regions. But in wealthier countries where there is also malaria, again, it's vaccinated against. There are vaccination programs and there are treatments that people can take so that they don't die of it. But look at the death rate there. And that's because of these reasons that people can't recognise, or even if they can recognise what's wrong with them, there are no health centres, or they just don't have the money to take their loved ones to the health centres because of the cost. So that's a huge disparity in health. Let's move on. And I've just said this really. The horrific facts. In Africa, 1 child dies every minute because of malaria. It's preventable and treatable, yet this continues to happen. In 2013, 500,000 people died in Africa from malaria. And you compare that to the numbers of the coronavirus, and we don't even think about this, do we? Because these deaths in Africa don't generally affect us. We are so far removed from it, we don't even realise it's happening. But each year, that's how many people are dying from malaria in Africa. 80% of malaria deaths are children. Malaria is common in the tropical regions, and a huge amount of Africa lies within that region. So why is healthcare better in high-income countries? Well, we have better healthcare. You know that. Better hospitals, clinics, surgeries, and don't forget our emergency services as well. People that can, if you've got a problem at home, people that can actually be at your front doorstep within a few minutes. More doctors and nurses being trained. And that's very true. We have a very good education system where we can train up doctors and nurses, and we've got plenty of them, which means a lower patient per doctor ratio. So for each doctor in your area, they might have a few hundred patients. But for a doctor in Malawi in Africa, they might have tens of thousands of patients, so very long waiting lists. We do a lot of research into diseases and develop vaccinations. This pandemic has been proof of that. As a high-income country, we've managed to be one of the first countries to actually come up with vaccinations. Better treatment, better equipment, better quality training, absolutely. Lower infant mortality rates, lower maternal mortality rates, and lower death rates, just in general. Longer life expectancy. We have more knowledge on how to stay healthy. You're educated on it. You're encouraged to be healthy. We have very good quality food and better diets. You get to eat a huge variety of foodstuffs because we import so much. and many of us will have a lot of meat and proteins in our diets. And we have knowledge on how to prevent things like HIV, AIDS and malaria. So generally we have much better healthcare in high-income countries. Now please bear in mind there are a few points on there that you might not normally talk about in exams. A lot of people, when they're asked about healthcare, just seem to say that we have better healthcare systems and they leave it at that. You have to develop your answers, and these are some of the points that you might use to develop your answers as to why healthcare is better in high-income countries. So there we go. When you look at those comparisons, it's not just how many people die, it's the age groups and it's what they die of. So another task for you, please. This is a 6 marker. I want you to spend about 8 minutes on it. I want you to use the data above. You don't have to use all of it, but you do need to use some of it because that's what it's telling you to do. Explain the disparity in health that exists between low-income countries and high-income countries. For this answer, I suggest that you describe some of the differences by using the data, and then you explain why there are these differences using some of the bullet points from that previous slide. Please make sure you develop your answers and write in good detail, and make sure that you show your teacher that you understand why there are differences in health between poor and rich nations. When you've done that, move the slide on. Okay, the final consequence of uneven development is migration. And I want you to imagine that you live in a poverty-stricken area where there's a lack of development. Would you stay or would you try and go? Well, the answer is most people would try and go. And that's why uneven development leads to migration. Because if people don't like their lot, they tend to move somewhere else where they think it's going to be better. So uneven development leads to migration both internally within your own country. So we might have people leaving certain cities that they feel that there aren't any opportunities there for them to move to other ones. We call that internal migration. So there has been in the past quite a lot of movement from people in the northeast of England away from the northeast and down to the southeast where there's more investment, where they think that there's more opportunity. So that's internal migration. And between countries, which is what we call international migration. Just a few terms for you that I want to make sure you understand. An immigrant is somebody that's coming into the country. They might not be illegal. A lot of people seem to assume that immigrants are illegal. No, that's not the case. Most immigrants from Europe that come into our country are perfectly legal and they're allowed to come. An emigrant is somebody that leaves the country. An economic migrant is somebody that's coming into a country or to an area for work purposes. So immigrants might well be economic migrants. A refugee is somebody that has no choice. They're forced to flee their home. Either there is a war going on, or they're being persecuted for their religious beliefs, or there's been a natural disaster, or something like that that is forcing them to leave their home. They don't necessarily want to go. They might actually have had a wonderful life where they are. They might have a very good job where they are. But unfortunately, their circumstances have changed and they have to flee their home. A displaced person is somebody that has been generally displaced, possibly temporarily, and they will want to go back home at some point. An asylum seeker is somebody that has arrived in another country, and they are trying to claim asylum. That means they're trying to claim that they need to stay in the country for protection or for refuge, so they need a place to stay. A lot of refugees are asylum seekers, because a refugee is somebody that flees, an asylum seeker is then somebody that asks to stay in another place. In short. Okay, so a few facts for you. Refugees and asylum seekers have no choice. It's life and death. They have an extremely tough journey which is life-threatening. They're vulnerable to all sorts of abuse. They've often suffered with trauma. They've often lost loved ones, especially if they're fleeing war. They might have even lost people on the way. They arrive often with nothing, often without any kind of documents or ID, and so they're classified as asylum seekers. They have very few rights, they cannot work, and they also cannot claim benefits. Once they get refugee status, they have to find accommodation and a job within 28 days before they're kicked out of their temporary accommodation. And these are the rules that apply for people coming to Britain. And most refugees and asylum seekers, they simply want to be safe. They just want refuge. But we have to look at the impact that this has on communities. And on the country of origin, that means where they've come from. So often the strongest come. When it comes to refugees and asylum seekers, it's often the strongest that will take that journey. That generally leaves elderly people behind, disabled people, women with very young children. They're the people that generally will be left behind because they're considered less able to make the journey. So if we have, let's just say, our young 20 to 30-year-olds, predominantly male, fit and healthy, that are making that journey, that is not going to help development in the origin country, so from where they come from. It's not going to help development there. Take, for instance, Syria. Syria is at war. People have been fleeing Syria for many years, since 2011. But a lot of the people that left in the early stages were the young men. They left Syria, and that's left behind people that are unable or less likely to be able to develop the economy there. It also puts a strain on the host country in terms of resources and services, because obviously these people will need housing and they'll need to be able to be put into the school system. Any children will be put into the school system, and they will be having to be given some kind of benefit, if you like, to be able to stay. Economic migrants have a big decision to make. They're often leaving families and friends. They want a better life. That's why they're coming. So we could take the instance of people coming from Poland into the UK. They can earn 4 times the amount of money here than they can in the Polish economy. So that's why they come. They're coming for better job opportunities. They're not coming to claim benefits. They're coming to work and to earn money, and maybe to send some money home as well. They are perfectly legal, and they're within their rights to do so, because they are part of the European Union, which is what we were part of too. And they work damn hard when they get here. They are not sponging off the state. Often they do the jobs that the unemployed British people don't want. They haven't stolen anybody's job. Everybody can get to apply for a job, and the person that's best suited will get the job. They don't come and steal them. They come and apply for them. However, there is obviously an impact. Some is positive and some is negative. It leads to a brain drain in the country of origin. So where they come from, there is a brain drain. In other words, all those people with good skills, good qualifications that are wanting to earn more money, they leave the country, and then they come, let's just say they come to Britain. Now that's going to help Britain out because we've got some young brains being added to our economy, but it's not going to help the country of origin. And again, often it's young men or young people that leave. It puts a strain on services in the host country again, because obviously we need to pay for things like translation services. We've got to put young children into education and so on. So it does put a strain on the host country. So that's a negative for the origin country and the host country. However, they do bring skills where there is a shortage. So if we've got a shortage of plumbers, and all of a sudden we're getting loads of Polish people come over that are trained in plumbing, then it fills that gap. So that's a positive thing. And they also earn, which means that they pay tax just like everybody else, and that helps our country develop. So that's the impact then. We have negative things and positive things. Okay, so your final question is a 9-mark question. You should spend 12 minutes on this question, please. The consequences of uneven development are huge. To what extent do you agree with this statement? I've given some guidance there. You must answer the question in the first sentence. So, I agree to a huge extent, or I agree to a partial extent. You decide. Your next paragraph should then give a reason why you agree to that extent, and you should develop and explain it. I've given you a starting sentence, should you like. Then you need to repeat with another point. So let's just say you did about wealth. You might now want to do about health. And then finally, you might want to say something about migration. Now, with migration, yes, there are negative consequences, but there are also some positive consequences. Then you need to do a short conclusion, and your short conclusion must restate your view and your main piece of evidence. You must have a conclusion if you're wanting to get above 7 or above marks on this answer. Finally, you need to submit these 3 answers to your teacher that you've done throughout today's lesson. If they are unfinished, can I ask you please to finish them for homework and get them into your teacher as soon as possible. Thank you very much and have yourself a lovely evening. Bye bye.